Welcome to Dark Magic Stories, a supernatural anthology born from jazz, smoke, and shadow. Tonight's tale, The Lilac Covenant, Chicago, 1920s. The Fonte Club glitters like a promise. Trumpets wail, glasses clink, and the city's sinners dance beneath chandeliers of gold and deceit. But behind the velvet curtains, something hungry waits. Something that feeds between the notes. This is the story of Clara Duval, a singer whose voice could charm the dead, and the stranger who loved her enough to make sure she never stopped singing. His gift was eternal devotion. His curse was forever. Episode 1. Smoke and Lilacs. Chicago, winter. The wind came off the lake like a blade, but inside the Fonte Club the air was warm and heavy, crowded with smoke and perfume, and the wet shine of laughter. Clara Duval stood in the wing with her palms pressed flat to her dress, feeling the thrum of the house band through the floorboards. Trumpet, piano, a soft brush on the snare. She'd sung in rooms before, plenty of them, but never here. Never beneath chandeliers bright as constellations. Never for a room that looked back like this one did. The stagehand tipped his chin. She stepped into the lights. For a breath, the glow swallowed everything. The tables and faces fell away into a golden blur. Clara drew in the smoky air, lifted her chin, and let the first note rise. The room tilted toward her, and the band folded around her voice like a hand slowly closing. By the second chorus, her nerves had burned down to a live wire. The world belonged to her for as long as the song lasted. She found a pocket of calm in the chaos and let herself look out into the room. Sequins flashed on flapper dresses. A man with a fedora cut cards at a table near the back. A trio of bootleg boys laughed too loudly, and then hushed when a bouncer passed. The Fonte had a heartbeat of its own with money, secrets, and something else she couldn't name. And then she saw him. Not the kind of man who hollered or pounded the table. He sat just beyond the circle of light, where shadows ran together. He wasn't drinking. He wasn't speaking. He only watched. His stillness made him stand out, more than any jeweled tie-pin. When her gaze snagged on his, the note in her throat trembled. A small stumble no one would notice but her. He didn't smile. He didn't move at all. Yet she felt, absurdly, as if he'd reached out and steadied her. She finished to a soft, surprised hush, and then applause that broke over her like warm rain. She headed backstage, which smelled of powder and hot metal. In her dressing room, a single lamp burned over the vanity, turning the mirror into a small, private sun. She shut the door, leaned to the side, and laughed quietly. That was when she saw the flowers. A bouquet waited on the vanity. Lilacs that smelled fresh and looked full. Their color had drowned to brown under the lamp's gold, but the scent rose up, cool and sweet, threading through the powder and smoke. She reached out and brushed a petal. The flower left a ghost of chill on her skin, as if it had been outside moments ago. She hadn't seen anyone bring them. No one had knocked. She held the bouquet to her face and breathed it in. It felt like a secret pressed into her hands. A secret, and an answer to a question she hadn't known how to ask. From the hallway came laughter, boots against the floor, a woman's voice asking for more powder. She set the lilacs down and rewound the moment in her mind. The lights, song, the crowd leaning closer. That man in the dark who didn't clap and didn't drink. She pictured his gaze again, and some part of her warmed, flattered, as if her voice had found a mirror out there and liked what it saw. She dabbed powder along her cheekbones while trying to quiet the flutter under her ribs. First night at the Fonte, and she'd sung well. That should have been enough to fill the room inside her. Somehow it wasn't. Moments later, she cracked the door. The corridor ran past other dressing rooms toward the main hall. A pair of chorus girls hurried by, arm in arm with their fox fur brushing the wall. "Too rowdy," one said. "He nearly toppled the table." "Should have tossed him sooner," the other answered. Clara stepped out and smiled a little too brightly at the girls who smiled back. A busboy hurried by with a tray of empty glasses. Somewhere down the hall, a door thumped shut, and a low voice said, "Keep your mouth, huh?" Followed by the kind of laughter that doesn't lift. She went as far as the curtain and peeked. On stage, the band slid into a slow number. The room had grown denser, the smoke layered like veils. Men in good suits leaned close to women with shining hair. Bouncers flowed along the walls the way shadows do when someone walks past a lamp. The Fonte didn't have eyes. Not really. But sometimes it felt like it did. Like the whole place turned its head when you moved. Clara almost looked for that man in the dark again. Yet she didn't. Instead, she stepped back and closed the curtain gently. She returned to her room where the lilacs waited, and she cupped the bouquet, lifting it again. Who brought these? She imagined a stagehand with a grin or a secret admirer fumbling for an address. And then she imagined the man in the shadows, the one whose stillness had tied a string to her voice. 3 quick taps sounded on the door, and, without waiting, Finlay leaned in. The owner carried his authority like a well-tailored coat. He had the kind of face you remembered, and then remembered not to stare at. "Miss Duval," he said, voice pleasant, practiced. "A fine first set." "Thank you, Finlay." His gaze touched the bouquet, slid away. "You'll do a second in 20. Keep your head. The Fonte folk like confidence." "I'll give them as much as I've got," she said lightly. "Good." He started to pull the door shut and paused. "No wandering where you don't belong," he added without inflection, as if he were reciting a line he'd delivered a dozen times. Then he was gone. She listened to his footsteps recede. No wandering. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, and turned the lilacs so the blooms faced the mirror. In the glass, she looked older than 21 for a moment. Lamplight does that. Or worry. She crossed to the tiny sink, sipped water, pressed cool fingers to the hollow at her throat. The scent of the flowers lay over everything. When she returned for her second set, the crowd had thickened, the air richer with 100 breaths. She sang cleaner this time, riding the band's tempo like a tide. And there he was again, still in shadow, still watching. She felt it without looking straight at him, the way you feel a draft when a door opens behind you. Her voice went silk smooth for a phrase she'd always had trouble with. The applause afterward sounded like approval and relief. Intermission brought more hallway talk. "Tossed him out the side," someone said. "Didn't want a scene." A second voice, lower. "Alley." Then a hissed shush and the hurried scrape of shoes. Clara's curiosity tightened like a ribbon. This was a nightclub in Chicago where drunks get tossed all the time, and men pick the wrong fight, only to find themselves learning to love the pavement. But the way the words bent, the care with which they were said, made the hair on her forearms rise. She finished the night to cheers that felt like a promise. The club settled into its late-hour shape, quieter, darker, richer. People who meant to be remembered stayed. People who understood how memory works, left quickly. She gathered her coat and the bouquet. Outside the dressing room, the hall thinned to a couple of bus boys and the lingering smell of illegal alcohol. She meant to go out the front and breathe the city air, let the cold press her nerves flat again. Habit pulled her toward the back door instead. At the end of the corridor, voices rose and snapped off. When she turned the corner, a pair of bouncers stood planted by the exit, their broad shapes against the frosted glass. One of them had his hand on the bar, while the other kept glancing toward the crack of light at the door's edge, as if measuring it. "I'm heading out," she said, lifting her coat in half apology. "Best use the front door, Miss Duval," the first said. From the alley, through the glass, came a scuffle sound. Not boots. Something softer dragging. A woman's voice on the inside corner of a prayer, and then a hush. Then nothing. A door down the hall banged. Finlay strode in with the quick, contained gait of a man who expected obedience. "Gentlemen." "Got it," one bouncer said. Finlay glanced at Clara, and for a sliver of a second, she thought she saw something like surprise cross his face, and then it was gone. "Miss Duval, fine evening. Use the front, if you please." "Is everything all right?" "Drunk who didn't know how to leave," he said. "It happens." She nodded and turned back toward the main hall. But as she did, the bouncer's hand slipped from the bar, and the door to the alley yawned an inch. A draft knifed in, and without thinking, she glanced through the sliver of space. Snow had powdered the cobblestones thinly, catching the weak light like sugar. In the middle of it lay a shape that took her a heartbeat too long to recognize as a man. His face was turned away, but below his ears the snow had melted into a dark, wide bloom. The line of his collar looked wrong. A second figure crouched beside him, then stood, and someone said, low and tight, "Shut it!" The door snapped closed. Clara's hand tightened around the stems of the lilacs until a twig bit her palm. "It was a fight," Finlay said. His voice was still pleasant. "Chicago breeds them. Go on home, Miss Duval. You've got an early call tomorrow." She stood a moment longer, then gathered her things and went out by the front into the winter night. The city was dangerous. Everyone knew that. But this didn't feel like the city. It felt like the Fonte itself had teeth. The Fonte closed its doors to laughter and song, but the night left Clara Duval with more than applause. A bouquet of lilacs whispered of a stranger in shadows, and in the alley, where the music couldn't reach, blood stained the snow. Chicago's nights were always dangerous. But this was something else, something waiting. And Clara had already stepped onto its stage. Next time on the Lilac Covenant, the gentleman in shadows will step into the light, and Clara will discover that every gift carries a price. The Fonte's lights rise again, the smoke curling like ghosts above the music. Clara Duval returns to the stage, her voice sharper now, pulled by a gaze she cannot escape. From the crowd's shadows, the stranger steps forward at last. Rislan Declan. His words are smooth, his presence unsettling, his flowers too perfect to be chance. But behind the Fonte's glamour, something darker stirs. A patron stumbles from a back room, pale and trembling, while the staff smile as if nothing is amiss. Clara tells herself it was too much gin, but her heart knows better. Tonight, the shadows will speak. Episode 2. The Gentleman in Shadows. The Fonte breathed different on the second night, easier under her skin, as if the room had learned her name. Smoke lifted in pale ribbons toward the chandeliers. Ice cracked in glasses. The piano was already flirting with the trumpet when Clara waited in the wings, fingers smoothing a seam that didn't need smoothing. "Miss Duval," the stagehand said. She stepped into light. The house lifted its face to her. Sequins, feathers, black coats. Laughter that paused as her first note rose and settled. She rode the band's pulse and let the room lean close. Somewhere inside the glow, her confidence rose within her. She saw him again. Not at first. Her gaze skimmed tables, caught the gleam of a ring on a hand, the tilt of a fedora, the careful attention of men who wanted to be seen attending. Then, past the edge of the staged light, a darker shape arranged with too much care to be casual. He didn't drink. He didn't speak to the woman whose laugh fractured a pearl of a moment beside him. He only watched. She kept her eyes moving after that, to her left, right, the balcony, the bar. She finished to applause that felt more than the night before. She dipped her head, then left the stage. In her dressing room, the vanity lamp made a small sun again, warm enough to melt the edge of nerves. She closed the door and leaned into it. Another bouquet of lilacs waited on the vanity. They were perfectly arranged, as if someone had taken time with the angle of each stem. Winter didn't know that smell. Instead, it was a spring that walked itself in off the street. She lifted the flowers and brought them to her nose. Where last night she thought of them as pretty, she now thought of them as intentional. She set them down and touched her cheekbone with powder and watched herself in the mirror. Her second set ran hotter. The band found a dark little alley of rhythm, and Clara walked it barefoot. This time she tried not looking for him, but found him anyway, still staring. Between numbers she went for a sip of water, and the hall's temperature dropped a degree. A young man leaned against the plaster near the service hallway, his fingers tapping an uneven telegram against his thigh. "You all right?" he asked. "Yes, I'm fine. I think I need fresh air," she replied. "Come on," the server said. She headed for the back door where she saw a drunken patron stumble out first. The color in his skin was gone, and he caught the wall with the palm of his hand, leaving a faint, damp print. His collar was dark where cloth met skin. Too much gin, she thought to herself. The Fonte swallowed so many odd little moments. She had seen drunks, men who misjudged stairs and nights. But the club was no ordinary club. Everyone knew the liquor flowing through crystal glasses wasn't supposed to exist, not since the Volstead Act had dried the city. Still, the bottles came off trucks in the alley, down through basement doors, carried by boys who owed their lives to the mobsters running Chicago's veins. The champagne sparkled, the whiskey burned, and no one asked questions so long as the band kept playing. Clara sometimes wondered if the police were blind, or if they'd simply decided to look the other way when the right pockets were lined. Tonight, one of those pockets lounged near the bar. Vincent Caruso, heavy with gold rings and a jaw like it had been carved out of granite. He was a businessman, but everyone knew his trucks ran through Cicero, and his men kept the speakeasies wet. He always came with an entourage, broad-shouldered boys who never touched a drink, but kept their eyes sharp on the room. Even here, in the Fonte, people parted for him, like he owned the floor. Clara had seen his type before, dangerous men who wore laughter like a suit, ready to discard it when the bills weren't paid. Men like Caruso didn't notice singers unless they wanted to. "Miss Duval." The smooth and unfamiliar voice came from just behind her, and she turned to face it, as if pulled on a string. There he was, the man from the shadows, the same unblinking gaze that had followed her from the stage, now fixed upon her in the cold night. He hadn't only been watching, he also waited. He inclined his head, as though greeting a queen whose performance he had appreciated deeply. "Rislan Declan," he said. "Clara," she replied. You were inside, watching me." "As was everyone," he replied. "You sang as though the room belonged to you. I wanted to see if you noticed me." "And you did." She thought of the flowers waiting in her dressing room. "Are you the one leaving lilacs in my room?" "Yes." "Nothing more perfect for a voice like yours. Rare, beautiful, a little intoxicating." They seemed fitting. The words unsettled her, yet she felt her face flush. No patron, no fellow performer had ever spoken of her singing that way. "When you sing, Clara, even the shadows listen." The door opened again, and this time it was the band leader. He waved her up with his chin, and she excused herself, heading back inside. On stage, she carried the echo of him with her. The song had a sweetness it hadn't had before, and when she finished her set, the crowd gave her a standing ovation. Hours later, the patrons thinned, leaving just those who meant to do something about mornings. A bouncer plucked a troublemaker out of a chair like a small burr from a coat and set him outside to sober up. Clara readied herself to leave, and like the night before, she left out the front door. The winter met her just outside, and she felt herself shiver, and she wrapped her arms around her body. "Allow me." She turned. Rislan stood just beyond the entry awning, as if he had always been there. He offered his arm as if presenting a solution. "Thank you," she said, and did not take it. Something like amusement moved in his eyes. He didn't press. He stepped aside so the wind hit him instead of her. "Then I will walk at your pace," he said. "That isn't necessary." "Nothing necessary about pleasure," he said mildly. "But I will walk where the night goes." The line would have sounded ridiculous from another mouth. They went as far as the corner before Clara paused. "Good night, Mr. Declan." "Rislan," he said gently. "Good night, Miss Duval." He did not bow this time. The lilacs lingered on Clara's nightstand, their perfume thick as smoke, their petals heavy as secrets. The stranger had stepped from the shadows at last, his words velvet, his gaze unblinking, and though he spoke of admiration and beauty, something in his stillness whispered of danger. Clara tried to tell herself it was only flowers, only flattery. But deep down she knew, every gift is a chain, and every chain leads back to the one who fastens it. Next time on the Lilac Covenant, whispers grow louder, questions go unanswered, and Clara begins to wonder if the Fonte's silken glamour hides something far darker than she dares to name. The Fonte glitters as though nothing is amiss, champagne flowing, laughter sharp against the brass. Yet for Clara Duval, the glamour feels thinner now, stretched over something sharp. Rislan Declan lingers near, his lilacs blooming in her dressing room, night after night, his words wrapping around her like silk threads she cannot break. But the whispers remain. A patron dead in the alley. Another stumbling, pale and trembling from a back room. Clara's questions are met with silence, with warnings, with stares that linger too long. And still, the lilacs keep arriving, sweet, fragrant, and impossible to refuse. Episode 3. Lilac Promises. The Fonte wore its glamour like a mask, bright and glittering as though nothing in the world could pierce it. Laughter spun into the rafters, heels tapped sharp rhythms against the polished floor, and the band poured life into brass and strings. But Clara knew better. The glamour began to feel thinner and stretched too tight over something sharp. Beneath the gloss and beneath the smoke and shine, something unsettled stirred. Every night the lilacs came. Sometimes they waited on her vanity, neatly arranged, perfect, fragrant. They filled the dressing room with a perfume that clung to her hair, her dress, her skin. Other nights, Rislan placed them directly into her hands. He spoke to her in quiet corners between sets, weaving gentle words. He spoke to her as though the world beyond the club no longer existed. "You sing as though the night bends for you," he told her once. And perhaps it does. Another night, he told her that the world didn't deserve a voice like hers, and he would help keep it safe. The devotion was more than flattering. It was intoxicating, like the flowers themselves. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to give in to the warmth of being seen, cherished, chosen. However, she didn't know him. One evening, between sets, she found Finley's companion, Jessie, leaning against the bar. "Jessie," she murmured. "That man. Rislan. Do you know him?" The smile faded just a shade from his face. His eyes flickered sharp before smoothing over again. He bent close, his voice a low hum, only for her. "You shouldn't ask questions like that, Clara. Especially not about him." Then, with a quick laugh, he straightened as if the moment had never happened. He tapped her chin playfully. "You think too much," he teased before strolling away. Later that night, she tried Maris. In the hallway, Clara caught her by the arm. After asking her, Maris stood in silence before she shook her head once and walked away without saying a word. Her silence spoke louder than any answer could. Her last attempt was with Finley. If anyone knew, it would be him. She caught him near the stage, where the band was tuning up, and chatter muffled her words. "Yes," he said flatly. "He's a regular. He's been leaving lilacs in my dressing room." "And?" "Well," she paused. "It's a little out of the ordinary, don't you think?" "Clara," he said softly, "I would place your focus on the stage." He pivoted the conversation neatly back to her next performance, as though her question had never been spoken at all. That night, when the music ended and the crowd spilled into the winter streets, she stepped outside, her breath a pale cloud against the cold. Her thoughts were tangled knots. The replies she received from Jessie, Maris, and Finley just didn't sit right with her. And there he was, Rislan, waiting with lilacs in hand. His smile was calm, as though nothing in the night could trouble him. "I've been thinking of you all evening," he said, placing the flowers gently into her hands. She smiled faintly, thanked him, and let the night carry her away in his gaze. But deep down, she knew that every bouquet was another chain, binding her closer. And one day soon, she would not be able to breathe. Lilacs in her hands, lilacs in her room, lilacs in her dreams. Rislan's devotion bloomed around Clara like a garden with no door, each promise sweet as nectar, each bouquet another chain she could not name. But the silences weighed heavier. Jessie's warning, Maris's silence, Finley's cold dismissal, each one closing in on her like walls she hadn't noticed until now. And still, the man in the shadows smiled as though nothing in the world existed but her voice, her face, her soul. Next time on the Lilac Covenant, Clara stumbles nearer to the secrets of the Fonte. The shadows deepen, and behind locked doors, something cries out where no music dares to go. For the Fonte is not just champagne and music. It is laughter that covers whispers, blood swept from polished floors, doors that remain locked for a reason. And tonight, Clara will hear something behind those doors that no promise of love can silence. Episode 4. A Hunger Hidden. The nights began to blur together, bound by lilacs and whispers. After every set, they waited for her, fresh, flawless, as if the season itself had bent to Rislan's will. Sometimes they sat upon her vanity, their perfume so thick in the cramped dressing room it seemed she was breathing flowers instead of air. Other times he placed them directly into her hands, his cool fingers grazing her skin as though marking her. And then there were the walks. Shortly after midnight, when the club's lights dimmed and the city's heartbeat slowed, Clara let him guide her. Rislan's smooth voice filled the cold air, and he continued to speak of her beauty that should never fade, and of her voice that deserved to be eternal. She clung to those words, fragile as glass, fragile as hope. Yet beneath his warmth, a chill stirred. A tremor ran through her each time his gaze lingered too long, as though he wasn't admiring her but studying something fragile he already owned. She told herself it was nerves, but each night she believed herself less. On one crowded night, the club swelled with bodies and music. She slipped away between sets, weaving through the service hallway toward her dressing room. That was when she nearly collided with a man as she rounded the corner. His suit was sharp, pinstripes catching the low light, and a gold watch winked when he reached out to steady her. The smell of smoke and whiskey clung to him stronger than the perfume of the women brushing past. "Well now," he said, his voice a lazy drawl smoothed by Chicago grit. "A girl like you ought to watch where she's going." Not every fella here would be so polite. "Oh, I am so sorry." Clara tried to step back. "No need," he replied. "Clara, right?" She nodded. "You sing up there like the whole city belongs to you." He gave a low chuckle, rolling it like dice between his teeth. "Caruso," he said finally, with a pride that needed no explanation. "Remember it. Men like me keep the fonte running when the law says it shouldn't. Gin, whiskey, whatever keeps the party alive." Clara slipped free, murmuring a thank you she didn't mean. His eyes followed her until she disappeared into the crowd, his name still heavy in her ears. She returned to the main room of the club and stood at the edge of the dance floor. The place swelled with bodies and music, the kind of evening where champagne ran like water and laughter broke over the band in waves. She noticed a man clapping along to the trumpet's cry. One moment he was there, and the next he was gone, as if he vanished into thin air. At first she thought her eyes betrayed her, until she convinced herself that they didn't. She searched for him in the crowd, but the dancers twirled on without pause. A pair of servers swept past and spoke in a hushed voice. "Escorted out," one whispered, though the phrase sounded more like an excuse than an explanation. Curiosity pulled her a step forward. Her heel slipped. She looked down. A dark spot spread across the polished wood. Small, yes, but too dark and too thick. Blood. And then movement, a rag in quick hands, a smear across the floor, wiping, scrubbing, erasing. A laugh cut sharp from the bar, covering her gasp. Someone shouted for another round. The band blared brighter, faster, as though the music itself had been ordered to drown out the evidence. Later, when she went on the search for Rislan, she found herself wandering corridors she never walked before. These walls bore no gilt, only bare plaster and groaning boards that spoke in low tones beneath her shoes. The air carried none of the perfume of champagne or smoke. Here, the fonte felt empty, unfinished, as though its true skeleton showed. At the far end stood a heavy, bolted and shut door. She should have turned back and let the silence guide her away. Instead, she stepped closer, and her hand trembled when it brushed the iron. She heard a muffled cry from the other side. She strained to listen, her ear almost against the wood. The cry rose again, and this time it sounded like a man, pleading for his life. Then silence. Her hand fell away from the door, and she stumbled back. She put two and two together. It had to be the man she saw disappear earlier. She turned to head back down the hall when she saw Rislan standing at the far end of the corridor. "Clara," he spoke softly, "you'll miss your cue." He offered his arm. Her lips parted, but no words came. She glanced toward the door, then back at him. "Clara, please." What else could she do? She took his hand. His grip was light, yet tender. But beneath it, she felt the truth. The strength, the certainty, the quiet insistence that she follow. And so she did, and headed back under the glittering lights of Fontaine, where the applause came, as it always before, she began her song. She stood on stage and tried to concentrate. All she thought about was the door and what happened to the voice behind it. In the crowd she saw Rislan. Watching, and near the back she briefly saw Maurice and Jessie, sitting in a booth, also watching. She sang like she never sung before, but only to drown her thoughts, and when she finished, she returned to her dressing room where the lilacs waited, just as intoxicating as ever. The Fontaine sparkled brighter than ever, but Clara had seen the cracks in its mask. A man vanished between dances, blood wiped from the polished floor, laughter layered too thick to be real, and behind a locked door, muffled cries that ended too suddenly. Next time on the Lilac Covenant, the mask slips further. Clara will see Rislan's hunger for what it is, and for the first time, she will not be able to look away. Clara tells herself it is love, that the unease threading through her songs is nothing but nerves. But tonight, the curtain will fall away, and she will see him not as the gentleman in shadows, not as the man who whispers forever, but as the predator he has always been. And once seen, it cannot be unseen. Episode 5. The mask slips. The spotlight burned hotter than usual, or maybe it was just Clara's nerves. She sang each night the club was opened, although her voice felt strained. She saw more and more disturbing and unexplainable things. Patrons vanishing, whispers cut short, stains wiped away before anyone dared call them what they were. As always, Rislan's gaze anchored her. He never missed a night she stood on stage, and after a few days, his gaze felt as if pinned in place by invisible claws. When the last note faded, applause rose. She bowed and let the velvet curtain fall between her and the crowd. She should have gone to her dressing room like she always did, but this night, things were different. He was there before she had the chance to do so. He held out his right hand to her, and in his left, he held another bouquet. This time she declined. A flicker of surprise passed over his face. He glanced past her, toward the smoky floor where laughter and clinking glasses carried through the curtain. "The men out there," he said quietly, "they think themselves untouchable. Power in every pocket, knives in every smile, but they're fragile, Clara. So very fragile." His eyes lingered on the crowd, as if choosing a name from memory. Take Caruso, for example. He struts in here like he owns the Fontaine. All he owns is a river of gin and the fear of lesser men. That's not power. That's cattle dressed in silk. Clara blinked at the name. Caruso. She had brushed past him only nights ago. Instead of replying, she walked around him and headed for her dressing room when he spoke. "Have I upset you?" She didn't reply, nor did she stop her stride. Her dressing room became her refuge. It was the one place where the club's glittering facade couldn't press against her so tightly. She shut the door, leaned against it, and breathed. She sat at the mirror and studied herself. Painted lips, the powder, the shimmer she wore for the crowd. Beneath it she looked pale, hollow. A voice in her head whispered that she was being suffocated, petal by petal, night by night. She couldn't keep letting him close her in with flowers and promises. She needed to tell him. She needed time alone. And the lilacs had to stop. She rose and slipped from the room. The halls outside were dim and the music distant. Her footsteps carried her down a narrow corridor she knew too well. She found herself back in the desolate hallway, where she had once heard muffled cries behind a bolted door. Only tonight, the door was ajar. The faintest sliver of light spilled into the hall. Every instinct told her to turn back, but she stepped forward, and with a trembling hand, she pushed the door open wider. Rislan stood with Caruso pinned to the wall. The mobster's mouth opened in a soundless cry. His slicked-back hair was mussed, his fine coat bunched at the shoulders where Rislan's claws dug deep. The swaggering man who had once strolled across the club's floor like he was untouchable, now trembled like a cornered animal. "Caruso," she whispered, the name slipping out before she could stop it. The sight was grotesque, savage, and yet she couldn't look away. The man who pressed lilacs into her hands and spoke of forever was no man at all. He was some kind of beast. Rislan's head lifted slowly, crimson still wet on his lips, and his white eyes locked on hers. He did not strike. He did not lunge. Instead, he released Caruso, who fell to the floor in a loud thud, and stepped toward her. With a flick of his thumb, he wiped Caruso's blood from his mouth. "I did not want you to see me like this." She staggered back until her shoulders met the wall. What are you? Are you a demon?" "I am what I am." He leaned closer. "My love is real, Clara. My devotion, eternal. But you must understand," his voice curled around her like smoke. "My love comes with hunger." She turned and ran, her heels striking too loud against the empty corridor. She pushed through the back door and into the freezing night. She kept running until her lungs burned, and the club's applause and laughter were swallowed by distance. Only then did she stop and brace herself against the cold brick of an alley wall. Her stomach twisted. She pressed a hand to her mouth. The image clung to her vision, no matter how hard she blinked. Rislan's white eyes blazing, his claws sunk deep, the dark gleam of blood. And yet, what terrified her most was the conflict gnawing at her. Part of her wanted to hate him. Another part wanted to know more. "What do I do?" she whispered to herself. She had no answer. No one to turn to. No safety. Distracted, lost in her own trembling thoughts, she didn't notice the man until she collided with him at the mouth of the alley. Strong hands caught her shoulders to steady her. She gasped and looked up, startled. The stranger's eyes were sharp and his voice was calm and low. "Clara?" She eyed him carefully. "Do I know you?" "No, you do not," he replied. "But I know you." She moved back, freeing herself from his hands. "Who are you?" "If you want to survive, we need to talk about Rislan." She blinked slowly. "Who are you?" she asked again. He squared his shoulders and stood tall. "My name is Dorian Austin." Clara found the truth waiting behind a half-open door. Blood, claws, white eyes burning in the dark. The gentleman who pressed flowers into her hands, who whispered forever in midnight walks, was gone. In his place stood something monstrous, yet still speaking of love. Next time on the Lilac Covenant, Rislan will strip away the last of his pretense, and Clara will learn that devotion can be as suffocating as it is eternal. The Fontaine's glitter still clings to Clara's skin, but it cannot mask the memory of what she saw. Rislan, his mouth red with blood, his words curling around her like chains. She flees into the night, desperate for truth. Episode 6. The Brotherhood's Warning. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to warn you. Clara's heart thrashed against her ribs. Warn me? About what? Not what, he corrected softly. Who? Rislan Declan. The name on his lips sent a jolt through her. She tried to mask it, but Dorian's eyes caught everything. He stepped a little closer. I'm with the Brotherhood, he explained. We're researchers of a kind. We study and track Demhan. Study? Track? What is this? Rislan isn't just dangerous, Miss Duval. He's an estri. He's over 5 centuries old, and one of the worst kind of Demhan. Clara shook her head. I take it you already have some idea. You already know he is different, Dorian's expression darkened. And the establishment you cater yourself to is different as well. I sing at the Fontaine, she spoke. Dorian's voice softened. The Fontaine isn't just a club, it's a feeding ground. Finley built it that way. There's a room behind those walls where they feed, without eyes to see. Rislan, Maris, Jessie, all of them. She wanted to call him a liar, yet her throat closed around the denial. She remembered the white blaze of Rislan's eyes, the way his claws had dug into Caruso's throat, the way he had turned, blood on his lips, and told her love came with hunger. Clara felt her knees weakened, but her voice hardened. How many? Excuse me. How many people has he killed? Dorian's silence was sharper than any number. Finally, he murmured, too many to count. That's what estri are. They consume until there's nothing left. And when they're done, they move on. Clara's thoughts turned to Rislan's hand at the small of her back during their walks, steadying her. She thought of his gaze, both terrifying and tender, and the way her voice rose sharper on stage when he was watching. How could that devotion, that attention, be only hunger? Why me? She asked. Because you sang, Dorian said simply. Because you shine. Estri always find something to fixate on, and they always break it in the end. Clara wrapped her arms around herself. She felt torn in two. One part wanted to hear the truth of it all from Rislan's own lips, while another wanted to trust Dorian, a man she just met. If you want to survive, you'll leave Fontaine. Tonight. They just won't let me leave. Her lower lip trembled. Dorian reached into his coat and pressed a card into her hand. If not, call me. I'll help you if I can. She stared down at the card. Eventually, he will feed on you. They all do. He gently slipped the card into her hand. You must go before he claims you as another victim. The words scraped something raw inside her, because a part of her, the smallest, most frightened part, knew he was right. Yet she could only whisper, I have to go back. I sing there, it's all I have. His eyes softened with regret. Then be careful. She returned to the Fontaine, as though in a trance, the music muffled, the laughter distant. In her dressing room, another bouquet of lilacs waited on the vanity. Their perfume filled the small room, choking, suffocating. She pressed a hand to her chest, Dorian's warning echoing against the flower's heady sweetness. A knock at the door jolted her upright. She turned the knob and opened it. Rislan stood there, as calm and certain as ever. "I want to explain everything." His voice was gentle, almost tender. She clutched the card tighter in her fist. "Then start," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Start with how many people you've killed." The card trembles in Clara's hand, its weight heavier than paper should allow. Dorian's warning rings in her ears. Yet back at the fonte, fresh lilacs wait on her vanity, their perfume thick enough to choke. The lilacs had lost their sweetness. What once felt like a secret language of devotion now smelled too heavy, too cloying, a mask over something rotten. Clara had reached her limit. Tonight, she wanted no bouquets, no whispers of eternity. Tonight, she wanted the truth. Episode 7. The Estrie's Confession. No more lilacs. No more charm. Rislan, I want the truth. His expression flickered, the faintest crease between his brows before it settled back into composure. He closed the door behind him, and for a long moment she noticed he studied her. Then, at last, he spoke. "I was sired 5 centuries ago," he said quietly, in the dead of winter. A siege had starved a city. Hunger birthed violence, and in that ruin, demand rose. I was made from it. I have lived in it ever since. His words carried the weight of centuries. Clara's skin prickled cold. She forced herself to meet his gaze. "How many have you killed?" she asked. His eyes didn't waver. "Too many to count." Her throat tightened. "And how do you survive?" "Hunger is eternal," Rislan replied. "It gnaws, it empties, it breaks you if you resist. So you feed. Always you feed." Clara swallowed hard. Her next question trembled in her chest, but she pushed it free. "Am I the first?" He held her gaze. "No." Her breath stilled. What happened to the others? Silence. Not cruel, not indifferent, just silence, so heavy it pressed down on her like stone. He didn't answer. He wouldn't. And that silence said more than words ever could. Finally he stepped closer. His voice softened, low and deliberate. "You were born for more than mortality. Clara, I want you forever. Not fleeting, not fragile. I want you remade as me. Sired, immortal, untouchable." Her chest seized, the words wrapping around her like chains. Images poured into her mind. White eyes glowing in the dark, claws dripping red, her own reflection vanishing into a monster's face. She staggered back, shaking her head. "No," she whispered. "I can't. I won't." Rislan's hand hovered in the air, as though he might touch her, soothe her. His tone curled like silk, quiet and merciless. Most survive the change. Some don't. But those who do, his pale eyes glinted. They never regret it. The room felt too small, the air too thin. Clara's pulse thundered in her ears. She wanted to scream, to run, to tear the lilacs apart, petal by petal. And then the air shifted. Maris appeared first, her scar catching the dim glow, eyes unreadable. Behind her came Finlay, composed as ever, his calm more dangerous than Rislan's menace. "There is a researcher from the Brotherhood hanging around," Finlay said, his voice smooth as glass. He must have told her. Clara's head throbbed suddenly, sharp and intrusive. She pressed a hand to her temple without understanding why. Rislan's voice hardened. "Stop trying to read her." But Finlay only smiled thinly. "I already have enough. The researcher's name is Dorian, and she knows too much." His gaze slid to Clara, cold and precise. "Either you sire her, or she doesn't leave here alive." Her breath caught. Rislan's jaw tightened, but Finlay didn't wait for an answer. He turned toward her with a practiced smile, the kind that always looked good for the crowd. "For now, Miss Duval, go on stage. That's what I'm paying you for." Clara's legs trembled as she moved past them, every step a fight against the weight in her chest. The lilacs waited on her vanity, perfumed and perfect, but all she could smell was blood. She stepped out from the dressing room and made her way to the stage. The lights burned brighter than ever. She opened her mouth to sing, and her voice trembled on the first note. However, instinct carried her forward. Melody wrapped itself around her like armor. From the floor, she caught sight of Jessie leaning against the bar, Maris seated with her scar gleaming in the low light, Finlay watching from the shadows of the balcony, and Rislan standing still as stone, his gaze never leaving her. The crowd clapped, laughed, cheered, oblivious, but every face she saw blurred into prey and predator. Every shadow breathed, every sip of champagne smelled faintly of blood. Still she sang. She had no choice. The notes rose, polished and bright, while inside her chest the words Finlay had spoken looped like a curse. Either you sire her, or she doesn't leave alive. When the song ended, the room erupted into applause, glasses clinking, and shouts for more. Clara bowed low, her lips curved into a performer's practiced smile. Inside, she felt hollow, the echo of her own song mocking her. As the curtain fell, she whispered under her breath, so softly no one but she could hear, "I don't know how much longer I can survive this." Rislan's confession, Maris's silence, the coldness in Finlay's eyes, it all spiraled inside her. The lilacs waiting in her dressing room no longer felt like gifts, but funeral flowers. Next time on the Lilac Covenant, Clara resolves to escape, but Jessie drags her into the Fonte's hidden chamber, where an ultimatum is given. The curtain falls, but Clara's song lingers only in memory. The Fonte's applause rings hollow now, her heart too heavy with the truths she's heard. The club's glamour has cracked, and through it, she sees the predator's den it has always been. Tonight, she tells herself, she must leave. But escape is never simple inside the Fonte. Episode 8. The Gilded Cage. The spotlight caught every shimmer on her gown, but it also revealed what her eyes saw. Predators. Every smile in the crowd looked sharp now. Every cheer carried menace. Maris leaned in a far booth, her scar catching the light. Jessie prowled the edges of the crowd, his gaze steady, unblinking. And above it all, Finlay watched from the balcony. The crowd thought they were bathing in glamour, in smoke and champagne. Clara knew better. The Fonte was no longer a sanctuary of music. It was a gilded cage, and she was its most treasured songbird. When the final note left her lips and the applause roared, Clara bowed and fled backstage, the velvet curtain falling behind her like the closing of a cell door. In her dressing room, another bouquet of lilacs waited. The scent struck her like a hand over her mouth, too thick, too sweet. She sank into the chair, staring at the pale petals, and whispered to herself, "I have to leave." Her fingers trembled as she pulled Dorian's card from her pocket. A stranger's warning felt more truthful than all Rislan's promises of eternity. She clutched the card so tightly the edges bit her palm. She told herself to rise, to go. Tonight would be the night she escaped. She grabbed her coat and slipped into the back corridor. The hallway stretched long and narrow, lit by bare bulbs that flickered, as if warning her back. It smelled different from the rest of the club, with less perfume and more mildew. The music thinned to a muffle throb as she drew her coat tighter and pressed forward. If she could just reach the alley, she might make it out. She might breathe again. But Jesse stepped from the shadows before she reached the door. His hand clamped around her arm with effortless strength. "Where you headed, sweetheart?" His smile was crueler up close. With his other hand, he plucked the card from her grasp. "Dorian Austin," he read aloud. So that's the man sniffing around. Her voice broke. "Please." She struggled, but he dragged her deeper into the bowels of the fonte, toward a door she had never noticed before. He shoved it open, and the air inside hit her like a grave being unearthed. It was cold, damp, and carrying the iron scent of blood. The walls were bare brick, stained in places that told their own history. A single bulb swung from the ceiling, its yellow light exposing too much and not enough. This was the fonte's hidden chamber, not built for music, not for dancing, but for feeding, the place where predators could strip away their glamour and be what they truly were. Inside, Finlay waited, his composure as pristine as ever. Maris leaned against the wall, her scar catching the dim light. Rislan stood apart, his stillness more frightening than motion, white eyes simmering in the dark. Jesse shoved her inside and shut the door. "What is she doing here?" Maris asked. Jesse shoved Clara forward and dropped the card into Finlay's hand. "She was trying to leave," he said. "Enough games," Maris said flatly. "She has seen too much. If she doesn't choose, she won't leave alive." "You know what?" Finlay added in a cool voice. "We can't let a mortal walk around with our secrets. Clara, either you accept what Rislan offers, or you don't leave this room." She felt her throat tightened. "So I'm just—" "What?" "A possession," Rislan's voice cut through. "Clara is mine. No one touches her." The words were not tender. They were possession, carved in iron. Maris's lip curled faintly. "You can't protect every singer that catches your eye forever, Rislan. You know how this ends." "Not this time," he said. Clara's voice broke as she found herself asking, "Or am I just a food to you?" Rislan stepped closer. His words were soft as silk and cruel as chains. "With me, you will never be prey. Without me, yes, you would be nothing more than food." Jesse's voice, almost cheerful, broke the air. "This researcher, Dorian Austin, he'll be easy to find, easier to break." "And also fun to break," Finlay added. Clara covered her mouth in horror. They knew his name. It wouldn't be long if they found his address. She realized the cruelest truth of all. It was never about whether she could leave. It was only about how long she could sing before they decided she was done. The Fonte wasn't just a club anymore. It was a cage, and Clara was the bird expected to sing until the predators decided her fate. Next time on the Lilac Covenant, Clara faces her final night as mortal. The promise of eternity awaits. But so does the price of hunger. The Fonte's walls had never felt so close. What was once smoke and glamour now reeked of secrets too sharp to ignore. Tonight, Clara would be forced to make a choice, one that might save a life or condemn her own. Episode 9. A dangerous choice. The chamber had no windows, no music, no illusion of glamour. It was the Fontaine stripped bare from all of it, except hunger. Clara sat rigid in a chair, while Maris leaned against the wall, silent and sharp, and Finlay stood near the door like a warden, while Rislan never took his eyes off her. Moments ago, Jessie left to find Dorian. Finlay wanted the Brotherhood researcher to be brought back to the club, unscathed, and every second of waiting pressed down on Clara's chest like a stone. Clara. Rislan positioned himself close enough that she felt his presence wrapping around her. You don't have to be afraid. With me, there will be no more hunger, no more fear. Eternity can be yours. She turned away from him. While the promise sounded beautiful, her heart was a storm of dread and confusion. His devotion was real. She felt it. Yet his hunger was just as real, just as violent, and just as endless. Hours dragged, and the walls seemed to close tighter. Clara heard the muffled sounds of the band playing, and when she questioned about her performance, Finlay replied coldly, "You've already been replaced." That's when she heard a soft, female voice, singing the same tune she had days ago. After, the crowd cheered, like they would cheer for her. "Replaced so easily?" she questioned. Before anyone could answer, the scrape of the chamber door tore through the silence. Jessie returned, and with him came Dorian, who looked battered, but not broken. His lips were split, his jacket torn, and his wrists bound. Jessie shoved him forward, and Dorian nearly stumbled, but remained on his feet. Finlay stepped forward first. "How long have you been watching us? What have you told her?" Maris's scar caught the dim light as she added, sharper, "What does the Brotherhood know about Fontaine?" Dorian held his head high. "Enough." His voice didn't crack, although Clara saw the faint tremor in his fingers. "If any harm comes to me, the Brotherhood will descend on this place." "The Brotherhood doesn't scare me." Rislan moved quickly and took Dorian by the neck. "Nothing but fragile mortals." "Then strike me down and find out for yourself," Dorian replied, "if that is what you wish." "No," Finlay interjected. "You can't kill him. Not here. Not in Fontaine." Rislan's eyes, now stark white, peered at him. "All you care about is your little human establishment." "Yes, and this human establishment brings in the money," Maris commented. "Personally, I don't care if you kill him. Just not here." Rislan slowly released his grip. "You Dame Han are centuries younger than I am. You do not have the experience, nor the mindset. This is why you all won't live as long as I have." Yeah, we get that," Finlay replied. "But for now, this place is ours. You're a guest, and you revealed to Clara what you are, what we are, and that led this Brotherhood asshole to us. As I see it, this is your mess to clean up. So clean it up, but not here." Rislan snickered and raised his hand toward Dorian. "All of you can't stop me." Clara watched as their eyes changed. Like Rislan's, their eyes turned color, but not white. They were jet black, like the sky without stars. "No!" A cry ripped from her throat before she even thought. She stumbled forward, placing herself in front of Dorian with her arms outstretched. "Stop! I'll do it. I'll accept you. I'll be sired. I'll become what you are. But only if you don't harm him." The chamber stilled. "Why are you protecting him?" Finlay asked. "He is Brotherhood. They have as much blood on their hands like we Diman do." "Because he's innocent in all of this," she replied. "And if I agree to become one of you, you have to promise me that you won't kill him." Maris sneered, her lips curling. That is no longer on the table. Rislan stepped forward. She is mine. My word is final. His white eyes burned as he looked at Clara, not with cruelty, but with possession. Promise me you won't kill him. She trembled as his hand found hers. I promise. Rislan bowed his head slowly. Then take him out of here and make sure he doesn't come back, Finlay spoke. And that is the same for you and your pet, Rislan. The chamber stank of blood and lilacs, the perfume cloying until it felt like breathing through silk soaked in iron. Clara bargained away her future, her soul, her very humanity, all to keep Dorian alive. Next time on the Lilac Covenant, Rislan carries Clara into the frozen night, his promise of eternity etched in every step. The Fonte's music was gone, the applause silenced, and Clara felt as though she had already stepped outside her own life. Rislan's grip pulled her into a world where dawn itself was a threat, and every step carried her further from what she had been and closer to what he promised she must become. Episode 10. The Last Lilac. The corridor outside the Fonte's feeding room was colder than the alley had ever been. Clara swayed on her feet, the taste of lilac thick in her mouth, the clock of her pulse stuttering. Rislan's hand enclosed hers. We can't walk, he said quietly. If we do, we won't reach my residence before sunrise. Behind them, Dorian lifted his chin, blood dried in a thin line along his jaw. Sunlight, he said, breathless but steady. That's what kills you, isn't it? That's why. Rislan's eyes flashed white. He moved like a whisper. His knuckles touched Dorian's right cheek with precise finality. The researcher crumpled without a sound. Clara flinched. You said, I didn't kill him. Rislan slid an arm beneath Dorian's shoulders, the other under his knees, lifting him as if he weighed nothing. Close your eyes, Clara. Her mouth opened on protest and found only air. He had already turned, presenting his back with a strange, courtly patience. She stared at the breadth of his shoulders, at the way his hair curled against his collar. The hallway stretched like a throat ahead of them. Now, he spoke. Her hands rose. She placed them on his shoulders and swung a leg around his waist, clinging the way a child might to a father who promised not to let go. His grip tightened around her calves, their bodies locking into a single line. Hold on, he said. The world broke. Wind slapped her cheeks raw. The floor became a ribbon, and the walls peeled into smoke. The Fonte vanished behind them in a gasp of cold air and lantern glow, and then nothing but the rush. Open your eyes, he breathed, and the night set itself back on its hinges. A row house rose from the gloom, its windows blacked and its stoop dusted in new snow. Chicago's noises seemed to stop at the iron gate. No horns, no shouts, only the small sound of flakes alighting on stone. Rislan set Dorian gently on the step, turned the key inside a brass mouth, and ushered them into a darkness that wasn't quite empty. Lilac struck her like a cloth pressed over the face. They crossed a narrow foyer and moved into a larger room that breathed in books. Shelves climbed the walls, hundreds of spines in sober jackets. A Turkish rug pulled colour from the dark, the hearth's black throat waiting. Rislan lowered Dorian into a high-backed chair and looped soft rope around his wrists. The researcher's head lolled, breath slow. Clara stood in the middle of the room with her hands at her sides as Rislan moved to the fireplace. He struck a match, and soon fire rose from the logs, providing warmth and light to the room. He turned to look at her. It will only hurt for a moment. She felt her lower lip tremble. Will I know I'm dying? He approached her. Every experience is different. He smiled as his lips parted slightly, revealing the tip of his lengthened canines. "Sit," he whispered. They sank onto the rug together like two prayers laid side by side. He lifted her hair from her neck with the gentleness of a tailor fitting silk, pressed his lips to the place where pulse met skin, and spoke in a low whisper. "I would never hurt you, Clara. You are my everything." Then the bite. It was needle and furnace. It was winter breaking into spring, and spring burning to ash, her body flooded with a hot, bright pain that was somehow clean, as if someone had opened a door inside her, and all the years spilled out at once. She clutched his shirt, and tasted smoke, and flowers, and iron, and beneath it the steady cadence of his voice, steady as bells in fog. The room tilted. The fire drew away down a long tunnel. For a heartbeat she thought, "I am dying," and then thought dissolved the way snow dissolves on the tongue. Darkness rose to claim her like a lover. Night returned in pieces, a flame's soft click in the grate, a carriage wheel far off, hidden under snow, the whisper of a draught threading the edge of a door. Her body lay on cool linen, even though she didn't remember how long she'd been there. She opened her eyes. The room was the same, yet not the same. The library's shadows had edges now. The grain in the shelves ran like rivers, and the lace on the hearth screen was a map of perfect holes. And the lilacs? Dear God, the lilacs! Bouquets on every surface, pale constellations crowding her vision, their perfume no longer sweet but dense. Beneath it, another scent wound itself around her spine. It was a mix of warm skin, salt, and the copper seam in a vein. Hunger woke like a second soul. She sat up too quickly, and the room leapt, then settled. She turned for Dorian, for Rislan, but saw no one. The chair where Dorian sat was now empty, and the ropes that once contained him were now coiled on the seat like shed snakes. The fire licked low. The wind pressed a palm to the window and withdrew. A door opened. Rislan approached her. "Clara," he said, as he pulled her into his arms with sudden, fierce relief. His breath touched her ear. "You slept like the dead for 3 nights. I thought you didn't survive the transformation." 3 nights. She tried to fit the number into the hunger and found no room. Her throat was a dry well. Her mouth ached in a way teeth could not answer. He leaned back to look at her. There was pride in his face, and something softer, something almost young. "You're Estri now," he said, as if giving her a medal. "You'll hear the world the way it is. You'll never fade." The scent came, cutting even through the lilacs. "I feel no different," she whispered. "Stay here." He left the room, only to return with Dorian. In her eyes he looked smaller and older. Exhaustion hollowed him around the eyes. His shirt was torn at the shoulder. When they locked eyes, she noticed something passed over his face. At first she thought it was fear, but then realized it was sorrow. "I'm sorry," he said in a voice rough. "I should have done more. I should have—" The rest drowned in the sound of his pulse. The rhythm filled the walls. Clara gripped the edge of the couch until her fingers creaked. "What is that?" Confused, her eyes turned to Rislan. He approached her. "It's hunger." He stroked her hair back. "You need to feed Clara." She turned back to Dorian. "Feed?" She then returned her gaze back to Rislan. "Please, don't make me." Dorian's gaze did not leave hers. You must. There was no pleading in it. She remembered the alley. If you don't harm him, I'll... She remembered the chamber. I'll accept you. She remembered the way the Fontaine swallowed what it could not name, and how she had sung anyway. I don't want to hurt him. I don't want to hurt anyone. She paused in mid-sentence. Dorian's scent was overwhelming, and the pull to taste it became unbearable. Somehow, her hands found Dorian's shoulders. Her mouth opened on instinct. Her fangs slipped, and she sunk them into the side of his neck. Ecstasy and horror braided themselves around her spine. Strength poured into her limbs like iron, melted and poured and set. The empty inside her filled, overfilled, until the edges of the room shone with a strange, terrible clarity. She tore herself away with a cry that sounded like someone else had made it. Dorian sagged to the floor. His eyelid fluttered, breath thinned, and a smear of red bright as a ribbon at his neck. Horrified, she covered her mouth and stumbled backward. What have I done? Her voice trembled. The taste. It was nothing she experienced before, yet wanted to experience again. Rislan moved to comfort her. You see, he spoke, as he lifted her face to meet his own. This is what you are now. His devotion that would have been beautiful on any day that wasn't this one. You took what you needed, he corrected. What you will need. Again and again, but never alone. His thumb brushed the corner of her mouth. You must take it all, Clara. No, she fought the urge. He wasn't to be harmed. Do you really want to let him go? Walk him back into a world that will bring the Brotherhood to us? She looked past him at Dorian, who was barely alive. Her shaking stilled. No. Rislan's eyes softened. Then finish it. He cupped her cheek, pressed his lips to her brow, and whispered, Now you are truly mine. She took one step forward as the hunger rose inside her again. Lilacs crowded the edge of her vision, pale as ghosts, the last flowers she would ever see the way mortals do. She lowered her mouth to Dorian's throat and finished what she had started. Clara's vow lay broken, Dorian's blood warm on her lips, and Rislan's voice, the only anchor in the storm of hunger now lodged inside her veins. She wasn't the girl who had first sung on the Fontaine's stage. She was something else,